Hey guys, Miss Yandell here, and it's time for our weekly lecture, right? So I hope you're having a great week, and I know it's the end of the week, so I wanted to say this to you. If you do not have a chance to get this in by Sunday night, then just get it in whenever you can next week. I'm doing my best to catch up on grading, so I appreciate your patience with all that. It's been a crazy week, and I'm sure some of you, if I were able to get a witness, I could, hear a hearty, yep, me too. So today we're going to be looking at a specific problem and poem that Elizabeth Barrett Browning poses. So if you have your textbook, go ahead and turn over to page 1123. This is the introduction to Elizabeth Barrett Browning. She is a really important figure in this time period. As a matter of fact, some of her material is actually romantic, but she begins to switch over to realism. Interestingly enough, if you're also enrolled in Introduction to Literature with me, or if you have had my Intro to Lit class before, you will know that much of what's happening here is exactly where we are in the other class. And what happens from Romanticism to realism is people become concerned with social issues and political issues, ethical and moral issues, and they begin to use those as a stimulus to their new pieces. And she does the same thing. So on page 1123, and I'm right about here. Can you guys see that right about there in the text? You see where that's underlined? Just wanted to give you a chance to underline it yourselves in case that's something you want to write about in the discussion board. So it tells us that Elizabeth's poetry is characterized by a fervent moral sensibility. She's very concerned with being a good wife, a proper wife, a faithful wife, and all of those things. But it says in her early work, she tended to use the visionary modes of romantic narrative poetry, which is what I was saying to you. But she turned increasingly to contemporary topics, particularly to liberal causes of her day. For example, it says in 1843, when government investigations exposed the exploitation of children employed in coal mines and factories, she wrote the poem, The Cry of the Children. That's actually what we're going to be looking at, is her work based on a social issue. And it talks about Barrett Browning uses literature as a tool of social protest and reform. So not only does she have this beautiful romantic poetry, but she is also seen as somebody who engages in social reform through the arts. And as I said, if you're in Intro to Lit, I'm sorry you're hearing this again, but we see this today, people using the arts to push forward necessary social reform, because a lot of times people will listen to the voice of an artist when they may not listen to other people. Think about the Oscars just a week ago when, there was this big controversy at the Oscars about there not being a representation of people from all ethnicities, that primarily it's still racially restricted and there aren't equal opportunities in the awards system, even nominations, let alone the recipients of awards. So that has been a big social issue, and notably at the Oscars, you're looking at artists who are standing up for those social issues. And when you really think about it, in music, in art, in movies, artists are putting forward the same thing that starts here in this time period that we see here. We see these people taking a stand and impacting social movements, politics, legal issues through the arts. Okay, so I want to remind you of that if you haven't had Intro to Lit with me in a while or studied these movements in a while, that artists really do. Poetry can change the world, can change our perspective. And I know that's like a general thing to say, a generalization of sorts, but it's really not. It can start there, or it can get fueled there. The light, the match can be lit in the arts. And it's really interesting. One of the things I think they mention here is Uncle Tom's Cabin, and that's another piece of literature that was socially and politically motivated in looking at what's going on in society and how that's just not okay. So what I want you to do is just then turn over a page to 1124, and we're going to read a few lines from this piece, The Cry of the Children. And at the bottom it tells you what we just essentially said before, is that this is in response to the horrific conditions that children were encountering in the workplace. They were putting children to work, slave labor, basically, and in the industrial age, etc., putting them to work in factories. So let's take a look at this. That footnote on page 1124 reminds us Barrett Browning wrote The Cry of the Children in response to the report of a parliamentary commission to which her friend contributed on the labor of children in mines and factories. Many of the details of Barrett Browning's poem derive from this report. And so it's a Victorian issue at the time. Children were dying. It was slave labor, and they were in horrific circumstances. And so she saw this as an opportunity to write, to help promote change in this situation. And not only that, guys, but how many of you know sometimes when people do a movie about something, or people write literature, or even paint a painting, sometimes we don't even know there's an issue until we see it in the arts, or we hear about it in a song or a painting or whatever it is, right? So, okay, that's something to think about. So I want to go ahead and read the first 36 lines. I know that sounds a lot. There's just a couple of sections I want us to read. And I want you to think about, what does this make you think about? And especially for the discussion board, what would you like to say with regard to what we're discussing today? All right, that first line, let's just go ahead and read it. I mean, I just love this. I think it's incredible. How could you read this and turn your head? How could you read this and just refuse to hear? It's very powerful. So anyway, get ready. Here we go. Do ye hear the children weeping, O my brothers, ere the sorrow comes with years? They are leaning their young heads against their mothers, and that cannot stop the tears. The young lambs are bleating in the meadows. The young birds are chirping in the nest. The young fawns are playing with the shadows. The young flowers are blowing toward the west. But the young children, oh my brothers, they are weeping bitterly. They are weeping in the playtime of the others, in the country of the free. I want to pause right here and just kind of, for those of you who may not be picking this up immediately, or it may be a little difficult, the first thing that she says that I think is interesting is that even their mothers cannot stop their tears. And if you have children, or if you remember, even now, Lord, if I have an issue and I go to my mom and she hugs me, there's something about the tears, or there's something about my heartache, or there's something about my burden that seems to go away. So she notably, as a mother, says in this line, they are leaning their young heads against their mothers, and that cannot stop their tears. So right here, she's intimating that the sorrow is so deep, the pain is so deep, that even their mother's love cannot give them solace. So this is a deeper problem than any mother has ever attended, than any child has ever felt. Do you guys hear this? So she's alerting you to how big this problem is. All right, the next thing is she counters all these things in nature that are young. They're doing what they're supposed to be doing. They're growing up. The young lambs are bleating. The birds are chirping. The fawns are playing. The flowers are blowing. They're blowing toward the sea. They're doing all these things that when you're young, you should be doing. But she counters, but the young children, they're weeping bitterly. So what she's intimating here is that these children are being asked to do things they should not be having to do at their age and at that place in life where they are, where they found themselves. And in line 12, she says, this is the country of the free. Why are our children having to endure this? On the next page at the top, 1125, it says, do you question the young children in the sorrow, why their tears are falling so? So then here she's pushing a finger in your face and saying, are you just thinking that, those kids that always start crying over anything? Yesterday I saw a child just start yelling and say, I broke my leg. And they didn't break their leg. You know what I mean? They over exaggerate. Even Psalms sometimes. They'll scream and scream and cry and they just want attention. So here, do you question the young children in the sorrow, why their tears are following so? Do you just think they're fake crying or just griping or whining? That's what she's asking. The old man may weep for his tomorrow, which is lost in long ago. The old tree is leafless in the forest. The old year is ending in the frost. The old wound, if stricken, is the sorest. The old hope is hardest to be lost. Does anybody see the parallelism? She talked about the young nature. Now she's talking about the older, what they deal with, what they have to grapple with at the end of life, at the end of the life cycle. Then she says in line 21, "But the young children, O my brothers, do you ask them why they stand weeping sore before the bosoms of their mothers in our happy fatherland? They look up with their pale and sunken faces, and their looks are sad to see, for the man's hoary anguish draws and presses down the cheeks of infancy. Your old earth," they say, "is very dreary." I want to stop here, even though this is uber awesome. I mean, this right here is just saying there's no hope for them. They're not feeling the hope of tomorrow. And she keeps reiterating, we live in a free country, we live in an awesome country, and these children have no hope for the future. And so this is what she's intimating here over and over. "Our young feet," they say, "are very weak. Few paces have we taken, yet are weary, I think is. Our grave rest is very far to seek. Ask the aged why they weep, and not the children, for the outside earth is cold, and we young ones stand outside of where they should be, in our bewildering, and the graves are for the old." That's how it should be, right? That's what she's saying. This is how it should be, but this is not what's happening. Okay, so you can feel free to read the rest of this poem for sure, but go on down to 102 with me, or 101. So this is on the bottom of page 1126, and she says, "Now tell the poor young children, O my brothers, to look up to him," talking about God, "and pray. So the blessed one who blesseth all the others will bless them another day." And they answer. So here she's dealing with people who give pat answers of, well, just pray. It'll change. Just pray. God is there listening. Listen to me right now. This is important. Please don't tune out. Because I think today this is just as applicable as ever. We've got to be careful not to give people pat answers. We'll just look to heaven and pray. And she says, here's their response. They answer, "Who is God, that he should hear us, while the rushing of the iron wheels is stirred, while we sob aloud the human